there's enough life outside the building. The spaces outside are as significant, and therefore they are not wasteful spaces as anybody would imagine. And this is how they relate to our ancient buildings: verandas, porticos, open spaces, courtyards. I think this is how I think the building relates to the tradition or the past. It also tells us that tradition doesn't mean that we must imitate aesthetically, but we must pick up the spirits from that tradition, see how they are used by people, especially in terms of resources, climate, manpower, movement, and how we can really use it in today's context with a totally new expression. And this is where I think Kahn's contribution is. He immediately understood that climate, the hot climate, needs insulation. He also understood that breeze would become very important. So, as you would notice in this campus, cross ventilation has been a major concern. The other major feature of the campus is the corridors, the covered areas below the dormitories, which are like the ancient arcades of Mandu and other cities in India. And those arcades really cast tremendous shadow and give you a very deep but cool place to sit in the evenings and afternoons.
言いますのは、そのアメリカのそのカーンというのはどうもその近代的なカーンであり、そのインドとアーメダバードで作ろうとしたカーンの建築というのは、そのカーンが求めてたその原型に近いそのカーン、いわゆる建築なんだろうと。これは例えばアーメダバードの建築について言いますと、ほとんどそのガラスがないと。いわゆる壁があって開口部があるけど、開口部の中にガラスがないと。非常にその壁の中に切り抜かれたその開口部から入ってくる光の美しさは、光がどういうふうに壁を通してまた入ってきて、また壁が光を受けることによっていかに建築というのはドラマティックになるかということを思いましたし、またその現地で産出されるレンガを使って、そのレンガを使って作り出した礎石の建造物なんですけれども、そのディティールがまた非常に素晴らしいと。人間が一つずつ持ち運んだレンガを積みながら作ってというのは、非常にその地域というのか、その場所性を考えた建築であるということにおいては、そのカーンが作りとうとした場所に対する考え方も非常によく表れているんではないか。
Our resources were limited, and Kahn, being a Spartan person, an austere, a person who had very simple attitudes to living, but of course of very high level of thinking. He chose brick like we always chose brick for buildings. And as a purist would have, he completely avoided to use concrete as supporting elements, except as ties into these arches that he made out of brick.
If you consider the nature of brick, you say to brick, "What do you want, brick?" And brick says to you, "I like an arch." And you say to brick, "Look, I want one too, but arches are expensive and I can use a concrete lintel over you, over an opening. What do you think of that, brick?" Brick says, "I like an arch."
The first work done on these buildings was completely unacceptable to me. And I was heartbroken. The arches didn't complete themselves as arches. They looked like the work of one who never saw an arch in his lifetime. I proposed that I would like to build a sample wall showing how a wall should be built, how an arch should be built. We built over a small period of time and feverishly, went at it. I learned a few words in the language, and if I would jump up to this worker and say, "It is good," this worker just beamed with joy that someone talked to him and said it was good. This is not customary. We came up with a beautiful wall. The arches were magnificently laid. I said, "Let them duplicate the work that I did in their way, using their methods, but knowing my religion of the brickwork." And they did.
Kahn had tuned himself totally to the Indian situation. In India, we always like the yogis, we always like the sadhus and people who have renounced. And so while these buildings were built, a lot of people were doubtful about what he's doing. They never understood. In fact, I had a lot of firing from my clients and friends. But because when he talked of everything but architecture. He talked about the spirit. He talked about the psyche. He talked about how the behavior takes place. And he talked about the world which is hidden and not seen. And that is what really affected people here. And therefore everybody was fascinated by him. Now this fascination to me, and his last fascination about the Buddhahood, before he died, the last dinner was at my house, and he talked about the Buddha. And he talked about how Buddha and simplicity and enlightenment comes by going deep inside and becoming simpler and simpler and simpler, minimal, almost to nothingness. And I think this is what Kahn was talking about. So his architecture looks strong, heavy from a distance, but actually it is supposed to be dematerializing. It is the dematerializing the physical material so that it transcends into the spirit, and finally it touches your psyche. And I think this is what Kahn is about to me.
There must be an order of movement, an order of winds, an order of light. The order of light was respected in the buildings I did in India and Pakistan, now Bangladesh, by giving the outside building to the sun and the interior building to habitation.
In the 1960s, there is a lot of turmoil in the country, I mean Pakistan, Indian Pakistan. And especially there is a demand for right of self-determination in East Pakistan. And the tempo was gradually increasing. And the government of Pakistan at that time had to decide that the main seat of parliament should be in Dhaka.
The determination to close the physical gap between the east and west wing of Pakistan created the unprecedented idea of a capital in two locations, each vested with interrelated responsibilities. The government of Field Marshal Ayub Khan took this historic decision to establish the second capital of Pakistan at Dhaka in June 1959.
I was working with the government of the then East Pakistan, and I was called to Islamabad and to help the Ministry of Works to sort of select an architect for the Parliament complex. Without any sort of priorities for one person or the other, we selected three persons: Corbu, Alto, and Kahn. Corbu could not come because of his other engagements. Alto agreed, but he fell sick, and that's also the reason why he could not come. And Lou Kahn was the person who agreed. And personally, I feel that we were very lucky that he is the person who agreed, and he is the person who could come for this project.
He was very, very interested in this idea of a young country and being able to help them out at a very early stage. And the fact that I've always wondered about the fact that a Muslim country chose Lou. His name happens to be the same. They were comfortable with that. And so they liked Kahn, I think.
I was given an extensive program of buildings: the Assembly, the Supreme Court, hostels, schools, a stadium, the diplomatic enclave, the living sector, market, all to be placed on 1,000 acres of flat land subject to flood. I kept thinking of how these buildings may be grouped and what would cause them to take their place on the land. On the night of the third day, I fell out of bed with a thought which is still the prevailing idea of the plan. This came simply from the realization that an assembly building is a transcendent place. A place, no matter what kind of a rogue you are, when you go into an assembly, somehow you may vote for the right thing. I observed that the Pakistanis do pray 5 times each day, and very earnestly. So I thought of this preposterous idea of having a mosque attached to the assembly. In the program, there was some semblance of a prayer hall, which was 3,000 square feet, and the instruction was also to have a closet for rugs. The point I wanted to convey was that it should be a full-flown mosque, and that it should be over an entrance, so that the mosque would talk to the assembly, and the assembly would talk to the mosque. I couldn't wait until morning in my anxiety to relate these thoughts to Kafaluddin Ahmad, who was in charge of this project. I was there at 9 o'clock sharp and told him about the symbolic importance of the mosque. He got on the phone and talked to several ministers. After he had spoken for some while, he turned to me and said, "Professor Kahn, I think you have something there."
While I was there on my second trip, I was taken aside by Mr. Zufil Bhutto, who was a member of the National Assembly, in a private, very private conversation, and told, obviously the message was for Lou, it was not for me, that this might someday be the capital of not just East Pakistan, but the capital of a sovereign nation. We couldn't respond directly to that because we weren't supposed to know about that. And besides, it was all just speculation. But 10 years later, that, of course, did happen. And I think that the complex, as Lou envisioned it, was well suited for the capital of a country.
He was given 800 acres of free land. At that time, it was on sort of almost the border of developed Dhaka. But now it has become actually the heart of the city. And within that central complex, the whole thing has been organized through open spaces, gardens, and other buildings in such a way that ultimately the parliament becomes the supreme building. And I think that's absolutely right architecturally.
During the Civil War, work in Mr. Kahn's office on this project never stopped. And we would ask Lou, why not? And he simply said, the government, our client, has not asked me to stop. And so he continued with this work. So when the independence was declared and the government of Bangladesh invited him to come, he was ready to continue his work.
The architectural image of the assembly building grows out of the conception to give particular shape to the varying interior needs, expressing them on the exterior. The image is that of a many-faceted precious stone, constructed in concrete and marble. The architecture of the hostels with deep protecting porches is the same as that of the assembly. Conceived as studies and their gardens, they are placed looking toward the assembly, forming a triangular composition. The lake in which the buildings are reflected and the interweaving of lesser lakes, fountains, and gardens holds the entire composition in balance. Because this is delta country, buildings are placed on mounds to protect them from flood. The ground for the mounds comes from the digging of lakes and ponds. I took over the role of land architect, and I sold them the idea of roads which were bridges. During the dry season, you can walk under them or grow under them if you like. They should be made as a kind of rock which was given to them after the monsoon.
The very initial stage when Kahn stepped in this project, he came with a rather open mind. He knew very well that the technology that was available in USA in the 1960s was not the same in Dhaka. So that is why I tell that he came with an open mind. He did send an advance team with Fred Langford to find out the technologies that is available here locally and known to the local craftsmen and the masons, how to cast concrete and how the bricks are done, how pointing bricks are done, how brick arches are done. So these all sorts of experiments were done locally, and only after that he, with the experience in those actual things available here with the worksmen, he incorporated it, and then in the light of that he did develop the details back in Philadelphia.
That shows the assembly being built, and that's a building of concrete and marble, which is not on there yet. But this shows you the bamboo construction which they used. Prior to the coming of the cranes, which was just 2 months ago, these cranes came in. But up to this point, the women carried on their heads the baskets of cement. It became precarious after a while because the cement was beginning to dry before they got to the top. So therefore, a crane was absolutely necessary, and that's what they have now. Next, please.
In Dhaka, I knew when I started I would get a miserable job in concrete. I didn't want a miserable building. I realized the trauma comes with the joint when the pour is over. That's when all hell breaks loose. Nothing could be more ugly. Everyone previously thought they would cover it up with mosaics and tiles. Now marble has come in, and everyone agrees to a man that the concrete doesn't have to be touched because the marble is so contrasting, so fine-giving to that which is rugged. A marble insert every 5 feet covers the point of termination of the pour and also acts as a wash on the outside. This is so the building does not get damp throughout from the water that is above. Every 5 feet determines its own water stop. The insertion of marble is a complete recognition of the order of the material, allowing the concrete to be what it is, allowing the marble to be what it is. You can expect perfection from marble. You can't expect it from concrete. The combination of the two has brought about a composite order which works, instead of a single order.
There has been questions. Questions have been raised by quite a number of people that this project is not suitable for a poor country like Bangladesh. Now, this implies many things. First of all, that at present Bangladesh is a poor country, but Bangladesh in ancient times was not a poor country, and I think, we hope, that it's not going to remain a poor country as it has been reduced to through circumstances. And secondly, a question of affording certain things is a comparative thing. It is worthwhile to afford a parliament complex like this instead of affording 1,000 Toyota cars or 5,000 refrigerators, because this particular group of buildings belong to the whole nation, and it is now recognizable as one of the most beautiful group of buildings anywhere in the world, and you just cannot put a particular value to it, because it is much more valuable than what it cost.
When man makes something, it must be unmeasurable in the end. When you do a work of architecture, you soon forget how many bricks you have to account for and what you have to devise in calling upon the orders of nature to make what you have to make. In the end, all those things are not known to anybody but yourself as a struggle of bringing things into being. A man says, "Ah, that's wonderful," and that's the sum total of it.